My son punched me at his wedding, then begged me to cover his $1.2 million gambling debt. The first thing I felt wasn't the pain, it was the shock. The sickening thud of his hand against my shoulder, a sound that ripped through the distant wedding music like a tear in fine silk. My son, my only child, had just punched me at his own wedding, and in the next breath, he was on his knees, begging me to cover his $1.2 million gambling debt. Just moments before, the Harbor Watch Club ballroom had been a picture of Southern perfection. Crystal chandeliers glittered over polished oak floors, and the air, thick with the scent of magnolias and salt from the Charleston harbor, buzzed with laughter and champagne toasts. It was 8:41 p.m., a night meant for celebration. But here, tucked away in a service alcove behind the main hall, the celebration felt a world away. The golden light spilling from the ballroom door seemed to mock us, illuminating the horror on my son's face. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Pierce wasn't the beaming groom from the ceremony. The man before me was a stranger, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. He shoved a heavy leather portfolio into my hands. "You just have to sign it, Mom, right now," he hissed, his voice trembling. I pulled back instinctively, the muscle memory of a 40-year career as a financial controller kicking in. "I don't sign what I haven't read. You know that, Pierce." "You don't understand." His voice cracked, desperation clawing at the edges. "There's no time." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the delicate silk of my dress. I could see the wild panic in his eyes, a terror so profound it made my own blood run cold. Then a sound escaped his lips, a guttural roar that was more animal than human. "I need the money!" The blow was powerful. It sent me staggering back against the cold, unforgiving brick of the exterior wall. The portfolio tumbled from my grasp, its contents spilling onto the stone pavers. Through the ringing in my ears, I saw a smear of spilled red wine on the ground nearby, dark as blood. From inside the hall, a single violin note screeched, horribly off-key, as if the world itself had just been thrown out of tune. A sharp, radiating pain bloomed in my shoulder. I looked down and saw the angry red imprint of his hand on the blue fabric of my dress. But the physical hurt was nothing. It was a phantom, a ghost compared to the profound shock that had seized my heart. Pierce stared at his own hand, his knuckles white, as if it belonged to someone else. The aggression drained from him in an instant, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated horror. His face crumpled. He collapsed, his knees hitting the hard ground with a crack, and his hands desperately clutched at the hem of my gown, like a terrified child. "Mom!" he choked out, his voice shattered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Save me. The debt. It's $1.2 million. They're going to kill me. Please, Mom." $1.2 million. The number hung in the humid air between us, more poisonous than any snake. My gaze drifted down to the scattered papers at his knees. My eyes, trained to find the devil in the details, focused on the top page. The bold black letters screamed at me. Asset-backed security agreement. And below that, a list. A list that included 2 beach duplexes on the Isle of Palms. My husband's legacy. Our legacy. His pleas faded into the background, merging with the distant, oblivious music. The pain in my shoulder was a dull, steady ache, but a different sensation was spreading through me now, an icy, absolute cold. The mother inside me was wounded, shattered, but the woman who had built an empire on logic and steel, the woman I had buried for decades, was beginning to wake up. The storm had just made landfall. I left him on his knees, a broken man amidst the scattered pages of his own ruin. I didn't look back. Walking away from the alcove and back toward the light of the reception hall was like surfacing from a deep, cold ocean. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it was all a muffled roar, a world I no longer belonged to. My feet moved on their own, carrying me past smiling, oblivious guests, their faces a blur of polite inquiry. I needed a sanctuary, a place to staunch the bleeding before anyone saw the wound. I found it in the bride's private dressing room. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was an oasis of quiet, smelling of hairspray and roses. A row of pastel bridesmaid dresses hung like silent, headless ghosts against one wall. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the heavy door shut, and the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard all night. It was the sound of control, a small metal fortress against the chaos I had just escaped. For a moment, I just stood there, my back pressed against the wood, letting the silence wash over me. Then, I turned and faced the mirror. The woman who stared back was a stranger. I saw the elegant, custom-made silk dress. I saw the heirloom pearl clasp my late husband, Robert, had given me for our 40th anniversary, still perfectly placed in my silver hair. I saw the carefully applied makeup, a mask of serene matriarchal grace. And then I saw the bruise. It was just beginning to form on the pale skin of my shoulder, a faint, ugly flower blooming in shades of violet and betrayal. It was obscene, a violent slash of color against the curated perfection of my life, my own son's handprint, branded onto my skin. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the cold marble vanity. My knuckles turned white. I stared into my own eyes, and for the first time in decades, the steel magnate, the shrewd controller, the woman who could make grown men tremble with a single quiet question, was gone. In her place was a 74-year-old woman, a mother, a victim. And then the dam broke. A tremor started in my shoulders, a violent, uncontrollable shudder that racked my entire body. I pressed my hand hard against my mouth, swallowing the sob that fought its way up my throat. It came out as a strangled gasp, a sound of pure, undiluted agony. One tear, hot and heavy, escaped and carved a slow, clean path through my expensive foundation. One. That was all I would allow. It was a single drop of weakness in an ocean of newfound resolve. I gave myself 30 seconds. I counted them in my head, each tick of an imaginary clock a step further away from the raw pain and a step closer to the cold, hard reality of what had to be done. 1, 2, 3. This was not a time for grief. Grief was a luxury. 10, 11, 12. Pierce wasn't just a gambler. He was a tool. That debt, that impossible number, wasn't just a debt. It was a weapon aimed at the heart of everything Robert and I had built. 28, 29, 30. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I straightened up, my spine locking into its familiar, rigid posture. With a steady hand, I wiped away the single wet track on my cheek, smoothing the makeup back into an impenetrable mask. My eyes, when I looked back at the mirror, were different. The hurt was still there, but it was now banked, like embers under a thick layer of ash. The warmth was gone. In its place was ice. I reached up and adjusted the pearl clasp in my hair. The familiar weight, a small comfort. It was a gesture of order, of putting things back in their rightful place. It was then that I heard them. Voices, muffled through the thick door. The whispers of curious guests who had wandered down the hall. Saw Pierce push her. Right there in the alcove. A woman's voice said, Looked awful. What on earth happened? Another replied, the social pressure, the public shame. It was already beginning. They thought they saw a family argument, a moment of drama. They had no idea. They were watching the opening shots of a war. I looked at the bruise one last time. It no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a map, a declaration, the starting point of a battle I never asked for, but one I would be damned if I was going to lose. The ice in my veins was a fire in my mind. The 30 seconds of grief were over. Now it was time for war. The bride's dressing room was no longer a sanctuary. It had become my command center. I pulled my phone from my clutch, my fingers flying across the screen with a speed and precision that had been dormant for years. My contacts list was a graveyard of old allies and assets, but the first two names were still at the top, right where they always were. First, David Chen, my lawyer for 30 years, a shark in a bespoke suit who had helped Robert and I build our fortress brick by legal brick. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Marion, it's after 9. Is everything all right? No, David. It's a code red. The sleepiness vanished from his voice, replaced by the crisp, alert tone I knew so well. What's happened? I started pacing the small room, the plush carpet doing little to soften my determined steps. Pierce is in trouble. Deep trouble. I need you to freeze everything. Effective immediately. Lock down my personal accounts, the trusts, the municipal bonds, everything. No one moves a dime without my direct verbal confirmation. Understood? Understood, he said. I could hear the faint sound of a keyboard clicking on his end. What's the threat? A wedding planner named Sterling Koch. He's the one who organized this whole affair. I need to know everything about him. His financials, his business partners, his shell corporations, where he ate breakfast yesterday. I want a full workup on my desk before sunrise. Sterling Koch, he repeated. Consider it done. Marion, what did Pierce do? I stopped in front of the vanity and picked up a black eyeliner pencil. There were no notepads here, only thick embossed cocktail napkins. I started scribbling on one. He tried to get me to sign over the Isle of Palms duplexes to cover a $1.2 million gambling debt he apparently owes to Mr. Koch. A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. 1.2 million? Jesus, did you sign? What do you think, David? I said, my voice flat. I'm sending you a picture of the document he dropped. It's a security agreement. I want you to tear it apart, find every loophole, every illegal clause. I want to be able to strangle them with it in a court of law. I'm on it, he said, his voice now a low growl. The fortress is on lockdown. Nothing gets in or out. Good. I hung up without saying goodbye. There was no time for pleasantries. My thumb immediately moved to the next name, Frank Russo, my private investigator, a man who operated in the gray areas of life, a necessary evil I'd kept on retainer for decades. If David was my shield, Frank was my sword. He answered with a gravelly, Yeah? Frank, it's Marion. Mrs. Crowell. Bit late for a social call. This isn't social, I said, resuming my pacing. I have a name and a number. The name is Sterling Koch. The number is $1.2 million. My son, Pierce, supposedly owes him this amount. Frank was quiet for a moment. I could practically hear the gears turning in his shrewd mind. Supposedly? That's your job, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. I don't believe for a second that a wedding planner is the one holding the leash on a debt this size. He's a middleman, a frontman. I need to know who he's working for. I need the name of the real creditor, the person at the top of the food chain. And I need it yesterday. That's a tall order on short notice, Marion. Then get a ladder, Frank, I shot back. my voice dangerously low. I don't care what you have to do, who you have to bribe, or what doors you have to kick down. You find that name. This isn't just about money anymore. This is an attack on my family. I sent him the same picture of the document I'd sent to David. This is what they tried to make me sign. Start there. The company on this letterhead probably doesn't even exist. I'll start digging, Frank said, a grudging respect in his tone. But this kind of information, it's not cheap. Did I ask you for a price? I said, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer a victim. Her eyes were cold, her jaw was set. The mother had been put on a shelf. The controller was back in the driver's seat. Just send me the bill. And Frank, don't disappoint me. I ended the call and placed the phone on the vanity. My hands were perfectly steady. The initial shock had been replaced by a cold, clear purpose. They had mistaken my love for my son as a weakness they could exploit. They had mistaken my age for frailty. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had just declared war on Marion Crowell. And I never lose. My calls were made. The wheels were in motion. Stepping out of the dressing room felt like stepping onto a stage. The wedding, once a vibrant spectacle, was now in its final dying act. The band was packing up, playing a slow, melancholic tune. The remaining guests were clustered in small, whispering groups, their laughter gone, replaced by tired smiles and speculative glances in my direction. The air of celebration had evaporated, leaving behind the stale scent of wilted flowers and regret. I scanned the thinning crowd for Ilara, the bride, the centerpiece of this whole disastrous charade. I found her near the grand staircase, not surrounded by well-wishers, but standing alone, clutching a glass of champagne with a white-knuckled grip. She looked like a porcelain doll on the verge of cracking, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. Our eyes met across the room. A flicker of panic crossed her face. She started to turn away, but I was already moving, my path direct and unwavering. I intercepted her before she could escape. "Ilara," I said, my voice low and even. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. She nodded numbly, her eyes wide with fear, and followed me down a quiet, wood-paneled hallway away from the last of the prying eyes. I led her to a small, empty sitting area furnished with 2 wingback chairs. The only light came from a dim sconce on the wall. I poured her a glass of water from a nearby carafe and handed it to her. Her hand was trembling so violently I was afraid she would drop it. I didn't sit. I stood before her, a judge in a silk dress. I slowly, deliberately, pulled the collar of my dress to the side, revealing the ugly, blooming bruise on my shoulder. I didn't say a word. I just let her look. I let her see what her complicity had wrought, her eyes fixed on the mark. A strangled sob escaped her lips. The champagne flute slipped from her other hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. She didn't even flinch. Her face, already pale, lost its last trace of color. The carefully constructed dam of her composure crumbled into dust. He said if I didn't do it, my brother—" she stammered, tears now streaming freely, cutting black tracks of mascara down her cheeks. "Mrs. Crowell, I'm so sorry. I was so scared. I didn't know what else to do." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a clean silk handkerchief, pressing it into her hand. My expression remained unchanged. "Tell me everything." And she did. The story tumbled out in a torrent of guilt and fear. It was a story about her younger brother, Ben, a 22-year-old kid with a rare heart condition, wasting away on a hospital waiting list for a transplant he couldn't afford. Then, like a miracle, Sterling Koch had appeared. He'd introduced her to Pierce, played the part of the generous benefactor, and arranged for a grant from a private medical foundation to cover the entire cost of Ben's surgery. an answer to her prayers. But the miracle had a price. The price was her life. Once her brother was on the operating table, Sterling's mask had dropped. He owned her. He'd explained that her marriage to Pierce was part of a business transaction. Her job was to be the perfect, charming bride, to help sell the illusion, and to gently, persuasively encourage Pierce to get his mother's financial backing. If she refused, if she said a single word, the grant would be revoked. He made it clear that he could pull the plug on her brother's life as easily as flipping a switch. "He called it leverage," she whispered, her voice raw. "He said love was the best leverage of all." My suspicion hardened into a cold, diamond-hard rage. This wasn't just about greed. This was about cruelty. It was a level of sadism I hadn't anticipated. "Do you have proof?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She nodded frantically, fumbling for her phone. Her hands shook as she unlocked it and navigated to her email. She held it out to me. The screen's cold blue light illuminated her tear-ravaged face. There it was, an email from something called the Palmetto Health Trust. The subject line read, "Funding Confirmation. Grant Hatch Ben V 774. It was a formal, sterile confirmation of a $250,000 grant for the life-saving surgery of Benjamin Vance. It was also a death warrant, a digital chain around her neck. I looked from the phone back to the terrified young woman in front of me. She wasn't a villain. She was a hostage, another pawn in Sterling's twisted game. And in that moment, my anger toward her dissolved, replaced by a cold, calculated compassion. She was a weapon that had been aimed at me, and now I was going to aim her right back. I gently took her hand, the one not holding the phone. My grip was firm, steadying. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "You don't have to be scared anymore," I said, and my voice was no longer that of a victim or a grieving mother. It was the voice of a commander. "You are going to stay by my side, and you are going to help me burn him to the ground." Sleep had been a stranger. I'd spent the night in my study, fueled by black coffee and a cold fury, coordinating with David and Frank. By the time the sun began to bleed across the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange, I was on my back porch. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. It was the calm before the storm, and I was sitting in its eye. A cup of steaming mint tea sat untouched beside me. Next to it lay a copy of the Post and Courier. On page B4, below a story about a new downtown zoning ordinance, was a small discreet headline: "Disturbance at High Society Wedding." The article was vague, mentioning an unfortunate family incident that had cut the Crowell-Vance reception short. The shame of it was a dull, distant ache. I had bigger fish to fry. My attention was fixed on my iPad, displaying the preliminary report Frank had sent just before dawn. It was a digital treasure trove of Sterling Koch's life, a web of LLCs, a history of failed businesses, and a string of lawsuits. But it was one line, buried deep in a summary of his early career, that had made me go cold. It was a footnote about a failed real estate venture from the late 80s, a partnership. The other partner's name was Robert Crowell, my late husband. Frank's note was blunt. "Looks like a nasty split. Lawsuits were threatened but never filed. Koch lost everything. Robert walked away with the core business model that would eventually become part of Crowell Logistics. This isn't just business, Marion. This is personal." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This wasn't about Pierce's weakness. It was about Robert's past. A ghost I never knew existed had just walked out of its grave. Sterling wasn't just a predator who had found an easy mark. He was a vulture who had been circling my family for 30 years, waiting for the perfect moment to pick at the bones. A shuffling sound from the doorway pulled me from my thoughts. It was Pierce. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside, his expensive tuxedo from the night before rumpled and stained. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and haunted. He didn't look at me, but stared out at the ocean as if he were contemplating walking straight into it. He was a ghost at his own feast, a walking embodiment of the ruin he had brought upon us. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold fire of my resolve. He had made his bed. He stood there for a long moment, the silence between us thick with unspoken accusations and regret. Then his phone buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the morning stillness. He flinched as if he'd been struck. With a trembling hand, he pulled it from his pocket and stared at the screen. His face, if possible, grew even paler. He answered the call, his hand shaking as he raised the phone to his ear. "Hello?" he whispered. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I didn't need to. I saw the words land on him like physical blows. His body went rigid. His eyes darted around the porch, wild and trapped. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. The call was short, brutal. When it ended, he lowered the phone, his arm dropping to his side as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He finally turned to look at me. The arrogance, the anger, the desperation from the night before were all gone. All that was left was pure, primal terror. It was the look of a man staring into his own open grave. I set my iPad down on the table, the screen still glowing with the secrets of the past. I looked at my son, the product of a war he didn't even know had been fought. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, measured, and devoid of any maternal warmth. It was the voice of a CEO demanding a status report. Who was that? I left Pierce on the porch, a statue of terror staring at a ghost only he could see. His problem, the immediate threat on the other end of that phone call, was just a symptom. Frank's report had shown me the disease. The root of it all wasn't in a back alley bookie's ledger. It was here, inside the walls of my own home. It was in the past. I walked down the hall to Robert's study. I hadn't been inside in years, not really. The cleaning service kept it dusted, but the room itself was a time capsule, preserved exactly as he had left it. The moment I opened the door, his scent hit me. The faint, familiar smell of old leather, pipe tobacco, and paper. It used to be a comfort. Today, it felt like an accusation. The room was my husband personified, orderly, masculine, and built of dark, heavy wood. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were filled with histories and biographies. His massive mahogany desk stood like an altar in the center of the room. This was the command center from which he had helped build Crowell Logistics, the place where he'd made the decisions that had given us our life. I had always seen it as a monument to his hard work and brilliance. Now, I wondered what secrets were hiding in its shadows. Frank's report was the map. I started with the filing cabinets that lined the back wall, their brass handles cool to the touch. The files were perfectly organized, alphabetized, and cross-referenced. ABC. I pulled open the drawer for C. Contracts, correspondence, Crowell. It was all there, a neat and tidy history of our success. But I wasn't looking for the official story. I was looking for the one that had been buried. I worked my way through the years, pulling out files from the late 80s. The paper was old, the typewritten ink slightly faded. It was a methodical, painstaking search, my hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a controller, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. There was nothing. No mention of Sterling Coke. No record of the failed real estate venture. It was as if he had been scrubbed from history. Robert had been nothing if not thorough. But I knew my husband. He never threw anything away. He was a pack rat for information, believing every piece of data, every contract, every memo could be an asset later. If the record wasn't in the main files, it was somewhere else, hidden. My eyes scanned the room again, and this time they landed on a small steel lockbox tucked away on the bottom shelf of his bookshelf, hidden behind a thick volume on maritime law. It was plain, gray, and utilitarian. It was also locked. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I ran my fingers over the simple keyhole. Of course. My mind raced, thinking of where he might have kept the key. But I didn't have time for a treasure hunt. I walked back to the desk and opened the top drawer. I rummaged past old pens and paper clips until I found what I was looking for. A single, sturdy paper clip. I straightened it out, bending a small hook into one end. My hands, which had been so steady on the phone just hours before, trembled slightly. It felt like a violation, picking the lock on a box he had so clearly meant to keep private. It was a betrayal of his memory, but his ghost had already betrayed me. The lock was simple. After a few tense moments of probing, I felt the telltale click. The lid sprang open with a soft metallic sigh. The box smelled of dust and time. Inside, there was only one thing. A single thick manila folder, yellowed with age. On the tab, in Robert's familiar strong handwriting, were two words: Coke and Crowell. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted the folder out and carried it to the desk, sinking into Robert's large leather chair. With a deep, steadying breath, I opened it. It was all there. The birth and death of a partnership. Initial plans. Architectural drawings for a series of innovative warehouse designs, and projections showing immense profitability. The ideas were brilliant, ambitious, and the notes, in the early pages, were filled with a shared excitement. I saw Sterling's enthusiastic scrawl next to Robert's more measured script. They had been partners, equals. Then, the tone began to shift. The file contained copies of letters between lawyers, memos from Robert to his accountant, a slow, methodical paper trail documenting how Robert had leveraged a temporary cash flow problem on Sterling's end to restructure their agreement, diluting Sterling's stake to almost nothing. He'd used legal jargon and complex clauses like a weapon, bleeding his partner dry on paper. As I turned a page, a small photograph slipped out and fluttered onto the desk. It was of Robert and me, taken at a company picnic around that time. We were young, smiling, my head resting on his shoulder. We looked happy, invincible, the founders of a dynasty. I stared at the image of the man I had loved, the man I had built my life with, and felt a profound and bitter wave of disappointment wash over me. He wasn't just a brilliant businessman. He was a thief. The final nail in the coffin was a single handwritten memo on a piece of legal paper, written in Robert's own hand. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was a note to himself, a justification. It read, "Must cut S out of the project. He's too ambitious, a liability. The core concept is mine now. It's for the best. It's for the family." For the family. He had stolen another man's dream, ruined his life, and told himself it was for me, for Pierce. The foundation of our legacy, the very money Sterling was now trying to reclaim, was built on a lie. The weight of that truth settled on me, heavy and suffocating. This was no longer a simple matter of protecting my assets from a con man. It was a reckoning, 30 years in the making, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The truth, I discovered, is a bitter pill to swallow. Robert's betrayal, Sterling's long-nurtured grudge, it recontextualized everything. I was no longer just a mother saving her son from a foolish debt. I was the guardian of a tainted legacy, facing a ghost from a past I never knew. But the knowledge didn't paralyze me. It focused me. I now understood my enemy's motivation, and that was a weapon. It was time to meet the devil himself. I chose the location with care, a sleek, minimalist coffee shop downtown. The kind of place with polished concrete floors and uncomfortable chairs designed for transient business meetings, not lingering conversation. It was neutral ground. I arrived at 3 o'clock on the dot and chose a small table in the corner, a position that gave me a clear view of the entrance. I ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking. Sterling Coke arrived 10 minutes late, a deliberate power move. He oozed a smug reptilian charisma, dressed in a linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. He saw me and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. This was the smile of a man who believed he had already won, a cat who had cornered the canary and was preparing to feast. "Marion," he said, sliding into the chair opposite me without being invited. "A pleasure. I was so surprised to get your call." "I'm sure you were," I replied, my voice as cool and hard as the marble tabletop. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I decided to fire the first shot. "I had a very enlightening conversation with my daughter-in-law last night. We talked about her brother, Ben Vance. It's a very touching story." His smile didn't falter. He was good. He simply raised an eyebrow, a picture of feigned surprise. "Ah, yes, the Vances. A tragic situation. I was happy to be in a position to help. Philanthropy is a passion of mine." "Is that what you call it?" I said, letting the question hang in the air. "Leverage is another word that comes to mind." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "You always did have a cynical mind, Marion. I imagine it was a requirement. Being married to a man like Robert, he had a real talent for acquisition." The jab at my husband was deliberate, a test. He was probing my defenses, seeing how much I knew. It was time to show him my hand. "It's funny you should mention Robert," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I was just going through some of his old files this morning. It's amazing what you find when you start digging into the past. Old partnerships, forgotten ventures, business plans from 30 years ago." For the first time, a flicker of something new appeared in his eyes. The smugness was still there, but it was now edged with a sharp, venomous curiosity. He knew exactly what I was talking about. The mask of the benevolent creditor was slipping. "Be careful what you dig for, Marion," he said, his voice losing its breezy charm and taking on a harder edge. "You might not like what you find." Robert was a visionary, but he wasn't sentimental. He knew that in order to build something big, sometimes you have to clear away the dead wood. "Is that what you were?" I asked. "Dead wood?" His smile returned, but it was different now. It was predatory. "I was the tree, my dear. Robert just took the fruit and burned the orchard down, but he taught me a valuable lesson. Never let emotion get in the way of a good investment. A lesson I've applied to your son. Pierce is a terrible investment, but as leverage against you, he's blue chip." There it was, the confession I knew I wouldn't get, wrapped in the language of a threat. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He was proud of it. I reached into my clutch and placed a small silver digital recorder on the table between us. It was a bluff, a piece of theater, but I wanted to see his reaction. He glanced down at the recorder, then back up at me. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He laughed, a genuine, ugly laugh filled with derision. Then, with a long, manicured finger, he slowly pushed the recorder back across the table toward me. "Don't be naive," he sneered. "This isn't a game you can win with cheap tricks. You're playing in my world now, a world of contracts and consequences. You think you have the stomach for it? Robert did. Your son certainly doesn't. And you're just a sentimental old woman holding onto a crumbling house of cards." He stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket. My offer stands, Marion. Sign the papers, save your son, and this all goes away. Or don't. And watch as I take back everything Robert stole from me, piece by painful piece. Starting with those houses on the Isle of Palms. The choice is yours. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the cold coffee and the silent recorder. The meeting was over. I hadn't gotten a confession on tape, but I had gotten something far more valuable. Confirmation. This was a war of revenge. And he believed he was invincible. He thought I was just a sentimental old woman. He had no idea that the woman he'd just challenged was the one who had taught Robert Crowell everything he knew. And I was just getting started. While I was unearthing the ghosts of the past, my son was busy chasing his own demons. The terror from that morning's phone call had pushed him over the edge. He was a cornered animal, and in his desperation, he did the only thing he could think of. He ran straight to the zookeeper. He arranged to meet Sterling at 5 o'clock in the sprawling, mostly empty parking lot of a defunct shopping mall on the outskirts of Charleston. It was a concrete wasteland, baking in the oppressive heat of the late afternoon sun. Heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, distorting the air, a perfect reflection of the distorted reality Pierce now found himself in. Sterling was already there, leaning against a sleek black Mercedes, the picture of calm indifference. He was checking his watch as Pierce's rented BMW screeched to a halt a few feet away. Pierce stumbled out of the car before it was even fully in park, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wild with a frantic energy. "You!" Pierce shouted, his voice cracking as he stormed toward Sterling. "What the hell was that this morning? That wasn't your guy. That was someone else. Someone who wants to get paid now." Sterling didn't even flinch. He simply pushed himself off the car and folded his arms, a look of mild disappointment on his face, as if scolding a child who had failed a simple test. "Of course it wasn't my guy, Pierce. Do you really think I get my own hands dirty? I'm a facilitator, a connector. I connect people who need money with people who have it. And those people, as you've discovered, have very little patience." The calm, rational explanation seemed to enrage Pierce even more. The last vestiges of his composure shattered. You promised you'd handle it. You said all I had to do was get my mother to sign and you'd take care of the rest. Now they're coming for my life." In a blind fury, Pierce lunged forward and grabbed a fistful of Sterling's expensive linen suit, shoving him back against the car. "You set me up! You threw me to the wolves!" For a moment, there was a flash of genuine violence, but Sterling remained utterly unruffled. He looked down at Pierce's hand clutching his lapel, then back up at Pierce's face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't struggle. With a slow, deliberate movement, he took Pierce's wrist in his hand and calmly, but with surprising strength, peeled his fingers away from the fabric. He smoothed his jacket, his expression one of pure disdain. "Don't be so dramatic," Sterling said, his voice a low, chilling murmur. "I am handling it. The plan is proceeding exactly as it should. The only variable, the only problem in this entire equation is your mother." He took a step closer, invading Pierce's personal space, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost hypnotic. "She's the one being stubborn. She's the one putting your life at risk because she can't let go of a little bit of money. I'm trying to save you, Pierce, but I can't do it alone." Pierce stared at him, his chest heaving, his anger beginning to curdle into confusion. The sun, low in the sky, streamed through the windows of the parked cars, striping his face with bars of light and shadow, a prisoner in a cage of his own making. What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I'm talking about your survival," Sterling said, his eyes locking onto Pierce's. "This is not my fault. It's hers. She's holding the key to your cage. All you have to do is convince her to use it. Go home. Talk to her. Make her understand what's at stake. Make her see reason. Do whatever it takes. Cry. Beg. Remind her how much she loves her only son. He patted Pierce's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem paternal but felt like a snake's caress. Go home and convince your mother to do the right thing, Pierce, if you still want to see tomorrow. Sterling turned, got into his car, and started the engine. As he pulled away, leaving Pierce standing alone in the oppressive heat, a horrifying realization began to dawn on my son. He looked down at his own trembling hands. He wasn't Sterling's partner. He wasn't even a client. He was bait, a pawn in a game so vast and so old, he couldn't even see the edges of the board. And he had just been moved directly into the line of fire. By 8 o'clock Monday night, my husband's study was unrecognizable. The scent of old leather and tobacco had been replaced by the sharp, acidic smell of black coffee brewed by the pot. The once orderly desk was now buried under stacks of documents, financial statements, and legal briefs. What was once a quiet room for reflection had become a war room, and I was its general. The centerpiece of the room was my large computer monitor, its screen split into 4 glowing rectangles. In the top left was my own face, illuminated by the screen's cold light. In the top right was Ilara, sitting beside me, no longer a terrified bride, but a quiet, resolute witness. Her eyes were clear, her hands steady. The bottom 2 squares held the faces of my soldiers. David Chen, my lawyer, looked tired but energized, a legal predator who had caught the scent of blood. And Frank Russo, my investigator, his face a mask of shadows in his dimly lit office, looked like a bulldog ready to be let off his leash. We were a 4-person army, assembled to dismantle one man's empire of revenge. All right. Frank's gravelly voice crackled through the speakers. Let's run it down one more time. My team traced the funding for the Palmetto Health Trust. It's a ghost. The money didn't come from some benevolent foundation. It was funneled through 3 separate LLCs, all of which led back to a holding company owned and controlled by one Sterling Koch. It's textbook money laundering used to create the leverage he needed to control Ilara. It's blackmail, plain and simple. David chimed in, his voice sharp and precise. And that blackmail is the predicate for wire fraud, extortion, and a dozen other felonies. The security agreement he had Pierce try to sign is predatory to its core. The interest rates are usurious. The terms are unconscionable. We can tear it to shreds in civil court. But a civil suit isn't enough, I said, looking at each of them in turn. That's his home turf. He'd tie us up in a litigation for years, bleed us dry with legal fees. He'd enjoy that. We can't just win. We have to annihilate him. We have to end this now. I looked over at Ilara. In front of her on the desk was a multi-page document David had drafted. A sworn affidavit detailing every conversation, every threat, every moment of her ordeal with Sterling. She picked up a pen. Her hand didn't shake. She signed her name on the final page with a firm, deliberate stroke. She was no longer a pawn. She was a queen, ready to make her move. She slid the document across the desk to me. Good, I said, tapping the signed papers. This is our ammunition. Frank, you have the financial crimes. David, you have the legal framework. Ilara, you are the living, breathing proof of his cruelty. I paused, taking a breath. And I have the motive. I held up the single, handwritten memo from Robert's lockbox, the one I had shown them earlier. This is the why. This is about a 30-year-old grudge. He doesn't just want the money. He wants to destroy Robert's legacy. He wants to see me, my son, and our family name ruined. He's driven by ego and revenge, and that makes him predictable. He believes he's the smartest man in the room, So we build a smarter room, David said, a slow smile spreading across his face. And we invite him into it. Exactly, I replied. The plan had been forming in my mind all day. A cold, perfect piece of machinery. We're not going to sue him. We're not going to the press, not yet. We are going to set a trap, using his own arrogance as the bait. We will stage a final negotiation, a surrender. Frank raised an eyebrow. He'll smell a trap from a mile away. Not if the bait is right, I countered. The bait isn't the money. The bait is me. He thinks I'm a sentimental old woman, broken by her son's betrayal. He's expecting me to fold to save Pierce. We're going to give him exactly what he expects to see. I looked directly into the camera, my voice dropping, taking on the tone of command I hadn't used in years. He won't expect us to use his own truth against him. He thinks the past is his secret weapon. We're going to make it his public execution. Here's the plan. David, you will prepare all the necessary legal documents for the transfer of the Isle of Palms properties. Make them look perfect, ironclad. Frank, I want your people ready. I want them discreet, but I want them there. Elara, I said, turning to the young woman beside me. You are the key. You are the ace up our sleeve that he doesn't know we can play. The room was silent. The only sound the low hum of the computer. The strategy was laid bare. It was audacious, dangerous, and had a dozen points of failure. But it was also perfect. It was a reflection of Sterling's own methods, deception, leverage, and a single, decisive blow. We had forged our weapon. Now it was time to aim it. The plan was set. The players were in position. All that was left was to bait the hook. This was the most critical part of the entire operation, and it rested entirely on me. I had to give the performance of a lifetime. It was 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. I sat at Robert's desk, the phone cool and heavy in my hand. In front of me, I had placed a small framed photograph of Pierce from when he was 10 years old, all goofy smiles and missing front teeth. I stared at it, letting the memory of that innocent boy wash over me, trying to summon the ghost of the mother I used to be, the one who would do anything to protect her child from harm. I needed that woman's voice. I needed her weariness, her heartbreak. I took a slow, deep breath, letting it out as a long, shaky sigh. I closed my eyes, picturing Sterling's smug, triumphant face. I rehearsed the first line in my head, draining all the strength from my voice, leaving only the hollow echo of defeat. Then I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice smooth as poison. Sterling Coke. Sterling, I began, my voice a dry, tired whisper. It's Marion Crowell. There was a pause on the other end, pregnant with his satisfaction. I could almost hear him smiling. Marion, I was wondering when you'd call. Have you come to your senses? I have, I said, forcing a slight tremor into my words. I let a long silence hang in the air, as if gathering the strength to continue. Pierce came to me last night. He's not well, Sterling. He's a wreck. He's at the end of his rope. He's talking nonsense. He looks like he hasn't slept since the wedding. I let my voice crack, just slightly, on the last word. I can't watch him destroy himself. I can't lose him. A mother's love. Sterling purred, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. It's a powerful thing. I told you this was the only way. It's a shame you had to put him through so much pain before you realized it. You've won, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I made sure he could hear the surrender in them. You win, hands down. I'll sign the papers. I'll give you the houses. Just call off your dogs. Leave my son alone. The triumph in his voice was unmistakable now. It was the sound of a 30-year grudge finally being satisfied. I knew you were a sensible woman, Marion. Underneath it all, you've made the right choice. The only choice. Let's just get this over with, I said, my voice flat, as if all the fight had been drained out of me. I pressed a hand to my forehead, a gesture for no one but myself. Feigning a headache. I want to do this tonight. I don't want this hanging over our heads for another day. Eager to put it behind you? I understand completely, he gloated. Name the time and place. This was the crucial moment. My lawyer's office, David Chen, 8 o'clock tonight. He'll have all the paperwork drawn up for the transfer exactly as you want it. You should bring your own counsel, of course, to make sure everything is above board. I held my breath. By suggesting my lawyer's office, I was creating an illusion of legitimacy, of playing by the established rules. It was a formal surrender on my territory, a final act of a defeated woman trying to maintain a shred of dignity. Sterling was quiet for a moment, considering it. Then he laughed, a short, sharp bark of victory. Your lawyer's office? How quaint. A final, futile gesture of control. I accept. 8 o'clock it is. I look forward to concluding our business, Marion. Yes, I said, my voice barely audible. Concluding our business. I hung up the phone, placing it gently back in its cradle. The performance was over. I leaned back in Robert's chair, the silence of the room settling around me. I picked up the picture of the 10-year-old boy and looked at his smiling face. Then, I slowly and deliberately turned it face down on the desk. The mother had left the building. The general was back in command. The trap was set. All he had to do now was walk into it. David Chen's primary conference room was a cage of glass and steel, 20 floors above the Charleston city lights. It was designed to intimidate, with a long, polished mahogany table that felt as vast and cold as a frozen lake. We were there first. Me, at the head of the table, a silent queen on her throne. David, to my right, his files arranged before him with surgical precision, and Ilara to my left, a study in calm resolve. Pierce was there too, slumped in a chair near the door, a ghost at a feast he didn't understand. I had simply told him his presence was required to finalize the agreement. He was pale and withdrawn, a puppet whose strings had been cut, waiting for the final curtain to fall. At precisely 8:05 p.m., the door opened. Sterling Koch swept in, followed by a slick, silver-haired lawyer who looked like he'd been born in a three-piece suit. Sterling was radiating triumph. He was a Roman emperor entering a conquered city, his smile wide and predatory. He took in the scene, the formal room, the waiting lawyers, me at the head of the table, and his smile widened. This was his victory lap. His eyes fell on Ilara, and for the first time, a flicker of surprise registered. He quickly masked it, his gaze then shifting to Pierce, dismissing him with a look of contempt. Marion, Sterling boomed, taking a seat directly opposite me. Punctual, I like that. Shall we get down to business? I have a celebratory dinner to get to. By all means, I said, my voice quiet. I nodded to David. David Chen stood up. He did not open the file containing the property transfer agreements. Instead, he picked up a remote and clicked it. A large screen on the wall behind me hummed to life. Thank you all for coming, David began, his tone formal and cold, the voice of a man addressing a courtroom, not a conference room. Mr. Koch, you and your counsel are here tonight under the impression that we are finalizing a transfer of assets. That impression is incorrect. Sterling's smile tightened at the edges. His lawyer shifted uneasily in his chair. What is this, Chen? Some last-minute gamesmanship? Not at all, David said smoothly. This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification. He clicked the remote again. The first document that appeared on the screen was the sworn affidavit Ilara had signed the night before. Her signature, large and clear, was visible at the bottom. "We'll begin with the testimony of Miss Ilara Vance," David said. "In this document, she details a systematic campaign of blackmail and coercion, in which you, Mr. Koch, exploited the life-threatening medical condition of her brother to force her into a sham marriage with Mr. Crowell for the express purpose of fraudulently acquiring his family's assets." Sterling stared at the screen, then at Ilara, who met his gaze without flinching. A vein began to throb in his temple. "This is absurd. She's a liar, a desperate woman trying to get out of a bad situation." "A situation you created," David countered, clicking the remote. The screen now showed a complex web of financial transactions, the flow charts Frank had prepared. "This brings us to the Palmetto Health Trust, a fictitious entity you created and funded through a series of shell corporations to launder the money for Ben Vance's surgery. This is not philanthropy, Mr. Koch. This is a textbook case of wire fraud linked directly to extortion." Sterling's lawyer shot to his feet. "My client will not sit here and be subjected to these baseless slanders. We are leaving." "I wouldn't advise that," David said, his voice dropping an octave. The door to the conference room opened, but it wasn't a security guard. It was a woman with a notepad and a press pass hanging from her neck, followed by two uniformed Charleston police officers. They stood silently, blocking the only exit. Sterling stared at them, his face a mask of disbelief. The color drained from his cheeks. He looked from the police to me, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He finally understood. "This is a trap," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "It's a reckoning," I corrected him, speaking for the first time. David Chen walked to the end of the table and placed his hands flat upon it, leaning toward Sterling. "Mr. Koch, as I said, this is a notification. We have irrefutable evidence and a sworn witness to bring charges against you for blackmail, extortion, wire fraud, and loan sharking. The district attorney's office is very interested in our findings, as I believe is Miss Ana Rivas from the Post and Courier." He gestured toward the reporter. One of the police officers stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling Koch, you're under arrest. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." The room was silent, save for the sound of Sterling's ragged breathing. His entire world had collapsed in the space of 5 minutes. As he stood, his body rigid with shock and impotent rage, his hand brushed against the expensive fountain pen he had placed on the table, ready for the signing. It rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp and final. As the police led him away, his face a contorted mask of fury, the flash of the reporter's camera went off, capturing the moment of his ultimate humiliation. I watched it all, my expression unchanged. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt only the cold, quiet satisfaction of a long overdue account finally being settled. The war was over. The morning after the war was unnervingly quiet. The sky over the Atlantic was a soft, pearly gray, the air still and heavy. I sat on my back porch, in the same chair where I had read Frank's first report, a lifetime ago. A fresh cup of mint tea sat on the table, its steam rising in a lazy spiral into the humid air. Next to it lay the morning edition of the Post and Courier. Sterling Koch's face was on the front page, a grainy, flash-bleached photo of him being led from David's office in handcuffs. The headline was bold and brutal. I didn't read the article. His story was over. Ours was just beginning. I heard the sliding glass door open and close. Pierce stepped onto the porch. He looked smaller, diminished. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He hadn't shaved. His face was a hollow mask of exhaustion and shame. He didn't look at me, but stood by the railing, staring out at the flat gray line of the ocean. The silence between us wasn't angry or accusatory anymore. It was a vast, empty space filled with the wreckage of what we once were. The storm had passed, and now we were left to survey the damage in the stark, unforgiving light of day. I took a slow sip of my tea. The bruise on my shoulder was a deep, throbbing purple now, a constant, physical reminder of our breaking point. But I no longer felt the need to look at it. Its purpose was served. Finally, he turned. His eyes met mine for the first time since he had knelt at my feet in the alcove. There was no defiance left in them, no desperation, only a deep, bottomless well of self-loathing. His mouth opened, and he took a ragged breath. "Mom," he began, his voice a raw, broken whisper. I held up a hand, a small, quiet gesture that stopped him cold. I wasn't ready to hear his apologies. Words were easy. They were the currency of his downfall. What I needed now was something else entirely. I set my teacup down in its saucer with a soft click. My voice, when I spoke, was not the cold, hard voice of the general from the night before, nor was it the wounded cry of the mother he had struck. It was something new, a voice pared down to its essential core, weary but absolute. "I've paid your financial debt, Pierce," I said, looking directly into his eyes, holding his gaze. "The money is gone. The lenders have been dealt with. That part is over. Now, it's your turn to pay your own debt, the real one." He flinched, but didn't look away. He stood there and took it. "This sickness you have," I continued, "the gambling, the lies, the weakness that allowed a man like Sterling Cock to sink his teeth into you, that is your debt to pay, not to me, to yourself." I reached over and picked up a small white envelope that had been sitting next to the newspaper. I slid it across the table toward him. "I've registered you at a treatment center in Asheville. It's a good place, quiet, in the mountains. They specialize in addiction and behavioral counseling. The car will be here at 9 o'clock this morning to take you to the airport." Inside the envelope was a one-way plane ticket. "Whether you get in that car," I said, my voice unwavering, "is your choice. It is the first real choice you will have made in a very long time. You can stay here and continue to be this broken man, or you can get in the car, go to that mountain, and begin the long, hard work of becoming someone else. Someone better." There was no easy forgiveness in my voice. There was no comforting embrace. The wound between us was too deep for a simple bandage. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I could give him. It was something he would have to earn from himself, one painful step at a time. I had simply cleared the path and pointed the way. He looked down at the envelope, then back at me. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He simply nodded, a slow, jerky movement. He picked up the envelope, his fingers tracing the outline of the ticket inside. He didn't say thank you. We both knew we were far beyond that. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving me alone on the porch. The car would be here in an hour. I didn't know if he would be in it. I picked up my tea and looked out at the ocean. The physical scar on my shoulder would fade, but the scar on our family, on the heart of a mother who had seen the worst in her own child, that would take much longer to heal. And the road to that healing, for both of us, was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.